Good morning, Ryan. Good morning.
Bill, happy Valentine's Day. Great to be on with you.
Happy Ash Wednesday.
I don't know if you wish on a happy Ash.
No, you do. You do. And you also do Happy Memorial Day. We've changed things up since Trump's in office.
Oh, okay.
Everything is greater than it was before, and...
Additionally, you can say Christmas now.
Yeah, and
you can say Christmas.
We're saying Merry Valentine's Day again.
Listen, this is, I know there's a lot of Catholics in Utica. Father Joe Salerno, Our Lady of Lourdes, would back me up on this. While you should go to church on Ash Wednesday, it is not a holy day of obligation. A lot of Catholics don't realize that.
Oh.
Father Joe told me he was already practicing the heart-shaped ashes for the day today. So,
there's some question because he's got like tennis elbow. He's got tennis thumb. He's got ash thumb. He said, I don't know. They might have to put him in a stint or something.
That is ash thumb. For the record,
I may have to go to confession because of the
So, Ryan, and the other thing we just talked about is I didn't realize, but Easter falls on April Fool's Day this year.
It's
kind of weird this year.
Somewhat appropriate, isn't it? That's somebody weird.
Yeah, and Christmas falls on New Year's. This is all screwed up. Everything is changing.
Another crazy thing that I'm learning is I heard this yesterday that Hillary Clinton might be the Democratic nominee in 2020. I'm not kidding. That's what was being reported.
Oh.
The Washington Post. Am I crazy?
Yeah, you are crazy. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, that can't happen. Who do you think, Ryan? I mean, I can tell you right now, our female senator is eyeing the position. She on 60 Minutes the other night. She's really laying the groundwork, I think. Who else?
Yeah, the other thing Kirsten Gillibrand did yesterday was announce that she's no longer going to take money from corporate PACs, which is a pretty huge announcement. And right away, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker followed behind her and promised to do the same thing. So this is the continued kind of move to the left. I say there's a group of senators that I call the potentially running for president caucus who make all their decisions based on that. But, I still think that the Democratic dream candidate is Michelle Obama. I still don't think she'll do it. I think she's going to have a hard time. I think she just does not want to do it. You've got to kind of want to run for president in order to run for president. But I think that she is kind of the one figure that could unite all these different factions of the party.
Yeah.
And if she doesn't run, I think it's going to be a bloodbath. And I think you're going to see all these different factions come forward. I mean, I think the way you see Joe Biden act in the past couple of months, it seems pretty clear that he's positioning himself to run. I think, all those senators we talked about, Kamala Harris of California, Cory Booker of New Jersey, they're going to run. And then, of course, the biggest wild card out there of them all is Bernie Sanders. He's definitely going to run.
Yeah.
And that's going to really complicate things for him.
Well, it is because, everybody's always talking about the division in the Republican Party. There is just as much of a division in the Democratic Party.
That's true, but I do think there's kind of a unifying enthusiasm with the Democrats that hasn't been there before.
I agree with that. Yeah,
that they do all kind of see Trump as this common enemy, but what I don't think is going to happen with the Democratic Party, despite all the chatter about Oprah, is I don't think they're going to go down the celebrity candidate route.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be someone like that. It's funny. I think you can compare football coaches to presidents. We tend to overcorrect. If you've got a football coach that's a player's coach and lets the guys do whatever they want, the coach you get right after that is a disciplinarian and makes sure that everybody shows up on their meetings on time and is quiet in the press. Take a look at the difference between Barack Obama and Donald Trump. That was a huge overcorrection, and I could see the American people going back to a candidate that isn't as gregarious, that's more of a traditional politician, and someone that probably tweets a whole lot less.
I was having this conversation with my son yesterday, and would the swing back be far left? I don't think so. I mean, ultimately, whether it's in 4 years or whether the president gets 4 years or 2 terms, at some point there will be a swing back. But I don't think it'll be a far swing. I think it'll be a swing back to the middle. Do you? Then again, we can't predict anything these days.
Predicting anything in Washington is such a bad idea at this point. I don't know. I mean, right now our politics is so rigid in the extreme factions of each party is winning out. So I just wonder how you can be a moderate, middle-of-the-road politician and survive one of these bruising primaries.
Yeah.
I do think a moderate candidate would get elected in a general election, but the question is, how do you get to that point?
Right.
And that's really the big problem that we're facing right now.
And I wonder, there's one other name that I thought about. What about this Joe Kennedy? Is he the third?
Yeah, so he's RFK's grandson.
Mm-hmm. He
gave the Democratic response. I think that he's probably a little too far out yet. I couldn't see him running in 2020. I do think
you could have said the same thing about Obama, though.
No, that's true. He's a member of Congress, so he's a congressman as opposed to a senator.
Yeah.
That's just another. Obama was a senator,
right.
At least at that point. But I also just think, I don't know if the Democratic Party in particular, I think, wants to diversify itself a little bit. He is young, which would offer that. But I would have to think that the candidates that are going to get the most attention are the candidates who come from different racial backgrounds.
Yeah.
I think that female candidates are definitely going to see a preference in the Democratic Party next time around. I just think that those voices are yearning to be heard on the Democratic side. That's not to say that, obviously the Joe Bidens of the world are going to get a lot of attention. But I do think that the voices and the faces of the people that you see on the Democratic side are going to be a little bit more diverse than Joe Kennedy.
Yeah. I saw a shirt the other day that was for sale, and it said, "Women belong in the House, and the Senate, and the Oval Office." It was kind of a funny little shirt.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think Joe Kennedy's chances would have been better had it not been for Chapstick Gate.
What was up with that?
Yeah. Second of all, so I just want to go back to the announcement from Gillibrand and Booker. That's got to be. I know that I've heard that the Democrat National Committee has had trouble fundraising. Is that going to be a problem for them to not take that outside PAC money?
I think it's going to make their life more difficult. Now, of course, they're following Bernie Sanders' lead, and Bernie Sanders made a ton of money. He raised a ton of money without taking this kind of corporate donation, but that's because he'd motivated
a movement of new voters. Yeah.
Of new voters who gave, thousands and thousands and thousands of small donations, $250 and less. And I don't know how big that pool is of potential donors to fund that many presidential campaigns. So I do think it's going to be harder for them to do it. Remember what they're talking about is that they're not going to take the money personally. Oh. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be some sort of, first of all, the Democratic Party can still raise it, the DNC can still raise it. And then the other thing is there could be PACs. See, the way the federal election law is written is that a PAC can pop up in support of your campaign that you have nothing to do with. In fact, federal election law specifically says you're not allowed to have anything to do with it. So, they can kind of wink and nod and act like, if some PAC pops up and starts running ads in support of them or attacking one of their opponents, and they take corporate donations, they can say, well, I don't have anything to do with that, and I'm against it, but yet it still exists.
Yeah, I just, when I heard that, I was kind of like, yeah, that's great. But then at the same time, I thought to myself, no serious candidate for president is going to turn aside money unless they know there's another well overflowing with money. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and Barack Obama dealt with this, right? I mean, he decried the influence of money in politics, and then he ran for president and realized, well, you can't run for president unless you have millions and millions of dollars. You just cannot be a legitimate candidate. That's just the way our system is, for better or for worse. So the idea that you can just turn your back on all that money is you can't just pretend like it doesn't exist. Now, I think what part of their game plan here is, if we get out ahead of this and say we're not going to do it, we're going to force everybody else in the race to say that we're not going to do it too. And then maybe we're on an even playing field. And then maybe that also starts this conversation about trying to minimize the influence that big corporations have over the electoral process. It's a bit of a gamble, but I think in this primary with so many different candidates and a huge lurch to the left, it's probably a gamble worth taking.
I want to ask you about immigration. Is there going to be a deal? You have a lot of different factions here of people on both sides of the aisle. Groups on both sides. Does a deal get done?
It's got to get done by Friday, Bill. And, there remains optimism on the Senate side of things that they can come up with something. And essentially what Mitch McConnell did was he introduced a bill yesterday that had nothing in it. It's a shell bill. And he told every member of the Senate, offer up any amendment you'd like. And if it gets 60 votes, it goes in the bill. And if it doesn't, we're done talking about it. So they haven't really made any movement on it yet because all these different factions are trying to come up with they're basically counting the votes, and they're going to offer up an amendment when they think they've got the 60 votes.
Yeah.
I think it's one of these things where it could look like there isn't a heck of a lot of movement on it, and then all of a sudden, Friday morning, a bipartisan group comes together and says, we've got 60 votes, put this bill on the floor, and then it gets passed. The question is, if it leaves the Senate and goes over to the House, there's no guarantees of it being passed, especially if it's too generous in some of the immigration reforms for the hardline Republicans. And what House Speaker Paul Ryan has said repeatedly is that he is not going to send a bill to the White House that the president won't sign, and the president continues to take a hard line on it. So we're going to have to see what happens. There is also the possibility that they get frustrated with kind of a broad immigration reform package, and they try and come up with something smaller that just really deals with money for the wall and then fixing DACA. That's a possibility. I think they'd like to try and do it all in one fell swoop. That rarely happens in Washington.
Rob says if the president does run for re-election, he will easily win. Rob, and I go back and forth on this. There is no way in hell you can make any prediction of what is going to happen in the midterms at this point, let alone 2020. What's your take?
Well, the idea that he's going to easily win, I think, is the one thing that we can't predict. I think it's going to be a bruising and difficult battle for both sides in 2020. The president obviously has his vulnerabilities, but he also has a pretty strong base of support. And so he's not going to be able to just sail through this election the way he did. Well, I'm not saying he sailed through it in 2016, but it's not going to be. The dynamics are going to have changed in some respect.
Yeah. Well, it's not a new movement anymore.
No. But do I think he can win? I mean, yes. There's a lot of people that think, oh, well, it's just a matter of time before we get Trump out of here. That's not me talking. That's what opponents of Trump would say. And I say, I just don't think that that's the reality of the situation. It's always easier to run as an incumbent. He definitely still has a base of support. And like what you talk about a lot, Bill, until the Democrats can put up a viable alternative, independent and swing voters are going to say, well, this guy's already doing it. My 401k is in good shape. I feel better about my taxes. I'm not really happy about some of the personal stuff, but man, maybe I should give him another go. That is a realistic scenario that could occur here in the next year or so.
I got to tell you, let's not, and I know those that aren't fans of President Obama don't want to admit this, but it's a fact. It's the truth. It's history. Obama there was a movement in 2008. Unlike so many other presidential races that we've seen, there was a movement. And Trump had that same, it wasn't the same movement, but the same type of, that same type of electricity. And the Democrats did not have it last year. I'm not sure there will be a movement in 2020.
When I think back to the candidates that have run for president in the last decade, I can really only think of three that have crossed over that line into really passionately driving voters to the polls. And when you can get passionate buy-in behind your candidacy, that makes life so much easier. And Barack Obama was one of them. Donald Trump is the other one. And the other one is Bernie Sanders. Now, Bernie Sanders didn't have enough passionate support to win, but his supporters, it was all driven on passion. That's how he was able to raise money in the droves and droves of money that he had without the backing of big corporate donations. So will there be another candidate? Will the Democrats find a candidate who can tap into that passion? Because a lot of times that passion is short-lived. It's a spark that you've got to turn into a big flame.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, Bill, and there's a lot of this that reminds me back to George W. Bush's reelection campaign. And people forget that there were a lot of people very unhappy with George W. Bush, and yet he won his second reelection. He coasted to victory. And what was the reason? That because the Democratic base could not get behind John Kerry as a candidate. It was all built on a hatred for George W. Bush. And while 35% of the country hated George W. Bush, they didn't do enough to establish John Kerry as a viable alternative. If Democrats can't do that in 2020, they're going to have a redux of that election, and Donald Trump's going to be president for another 4 years. So it can't just all be about hating Donald Trump. It's got to be about providing alternative, substantive policy issues behind a candidate who can drive people's passions if they've got any shot at winning.
Ryan Noble, CNN, we appreciate it. Enjoy the talk every week. We'll talk to you again next week.